Hello Internet, and welcome to a new tutorial. Here's a little something about me. Every period of the year I have a favorite synthesizer. It's not the synthesizer that I will use the most in my tracks, but it's the one that will inspire me the most sound design wise. It's the one that I will use to add ear candy in my tracks, you know, the memorable elements, the contrast elements, the elements that will make the track stand out. Today, Arturia released the new firmware update for their MiniFreak synthesizer, basically version number 2. And I want to find out with you guys whether it's going to be my new favorite synthesizer or not. Basically, we'll be creating a couple of patches with it, I'll give you some tips and tricks about it, and we will hear how it sounds in a track. So with that said, let's just jump to the desk and see what this new update is all about and just put it into action. Alright, so here's the new MiniFreak with OS number 2, and starting with the start of the show, we have a wavetable engine. Here it is for oscillator number 1 only, but that's not a big of a problem because oscillator number 2 has all of the FX modules, as you know, that we can use to manipulate the timbre of the wavetables. Here's the thing, the wavetable engine comes only with 32 factory wavetables. Now, yeah, this is a little bit of a bummer because there's no user wavetables, but knowing Arturia and how they dealt with the MicroFreak, I think, and this is just an assumption, that in the future we will see an update that will add user wavetables capabilities to the MiniFreak. I mean, they were able to squeeze a wavetable and a granular engine in the MicroFreak, so why not putting a wavetable engine in the MiniFreak, right? Anyhow, this wavetable engine offers us 32 really high quality wavetables. I mean, I really have nothing to say about them, and it offers us control-wise, width control, which is basically PWM, and tone control, which is a one-pole high-pass, low-pass filter that will help us shape the frequency content of the wavetables. Now, enough with the chit-chat. Let's just put this new wavetable engine into action. All right, so I'll start by choosing a wavetable called Bells. It sounds like this. Okay, let's go to the advanced tab in here, give it full sustain and maximum volume. So we have this. Now I'm creating a random arpeggiated lead, and for that I want the scan button to be modulated every time the arpeggiator creates a new note. So what I'm going to do, I'll go to the macro matrix in here and I'll set the velocity plus atmosphere in here to only velocity, and I'll use the velocity from my random arpeggiator to modulate the scan position or the scan knob, right? And it's basically the oscillator 1 wave slot in the modulation matrix, and I'll just set it all the way up from the velocity. And now with the random arpeggiator we'll get this. Perfect, but still not there. So what I'll do, I'll modulate the pitch of this oscillator, and I'll modulate it with a random LFO. So we have LFO number 1 in here. I'll set it to sample and hold like this, and I'll set the rate to, let's say 1/8. Let's set it to straight 1/8 like this, and I'll keep the retriggering to mono keyboard. And now I'll set it to modulate the pitch of the first oscillator or the wavetable engine. Okay, perfect, but it's a stepped modulation and I want it to be a bit smoother. So for that, I'll use LFO number 2. I'll set it to triangle like this, and I'll set it to a rate of, let's say, 1 bar, and I'll keep it on free. So there's no retriggering happening every time the arpeggiator creates a new note. Now I'll set it to modulate the pitch of the first oscillator, just like this, and now we have this. That's pretty much fun, but so far the lead isn't that interesting. So we will use the second oscillator as a comp filter. So I'll set it to comp filter like this. I'll set the cutoff to the minimum, the dampening to the minimum, and the gain to the minimum. So basically now it's doing nothing. Right? But what I'll do, I'll use the cycling envelope in here to modulate the gain. So basically we'll get this effect. You've heard this effect in many of my tutorials and many of my patches, and I really love it because it adds this kind of like a random groove, but it's not that random, it's still on the grid, if that makes sense, and it really adds a lot of movement to the sound. Anyhow, to achieve it, we're going to use the cycling envelope in here. I'll keep it on envelope mode, but I'll set the fall in here, or basically the decay, to something really fast, maybe let's say 11. And let's use it to modulate basically the gain or the feedback in this context of the comp filter, just like this. See how we have these bursts basically of like really fast delays. So we'll modulate this fall again with the velocity to achieve this effect that I was doing right now with my mouse. So let's click on the little plus sign in here and modulate with the velocity like this. Now, I just think that the LFO2 is modulating way too much the pitch, and we don't have this random stepped modulation as I wanted. So I'll set the LFO2 to modulate less the pitch of the first oscillator and maybe a bit more the random LFO. Perfect. Now let's add a bandpass filter. Give it some resonance like this. Now let's modulate the cutoff with both LFOs. I want a tiny bit of random modulation and a tiny bit of a cyclic modulation. So let's just add a tiny bit of both LFOs like this. Now the patch sounds good, but it's a bit cold and it needs some warmth and width to it, right? And luckily, Arturia added in this new update an effect called super unison. Yes, it's the same one from Pigments. So I'll just add it right in here. And as with every effect in the MiniFreak, it comes with some presets. So I'll use the Ravey preset for the sound. I'll give it some detuning, some dry and wet, and now check what we have. I really love this effect because not only it expands the width of the sound, but it gives it a really special warmth that you don't get by using equalizers or compressor. You know, it has this really special character to it. For the second effect, I'll go with a multiband compressor because I want to give the sound some OTT character to it and just keeps the dynamics in place. So here's the multi-comp like this. I'll keep it on OPP, just give it some time and a little bit of amount. And now we have this. Now we just need a fast delay to complete the sound, and for that I'll go to FX number 3 in here. I'll choose delay like this. I'll set it to stereo sync, and I'll set the rate to 1/16 like this, and I'll set the delay to insert. Basically the difference between send and insert: send, the delay will be in parallel, and this level knob controls how much dry signal we will send to the delay, but the dry signal won't be affected. It'll be always at maximum level basically. And insert, the delay will come right after the signal path, and this level knob is basically a dry and wet knob, so we can get like maximum or 100% wet delay signal. I prefer for this patch insert, as I mentioned, and I'll keep the feedback something like this, give it some level, and the time 1/16, and now we have this. Perfect. And now, let's hear this lead in the context of this track. So for the main idea of this track, I have these 3 main leads that I've created with my virus. They talk with each other, they create question and answer, but I want to add a new life. I want to add contrast, something new, like a new character to this track. And this is where this lead from the MiniFreak that we've created will come in place. So check this out from the beginning and listen how the MiniFreak will add the contrast I'm looking for. See how it added contrast to the structure? And you know, this is what the MiniFreak for me is all about. You know, as I mentioned in the first video I did for it, I'll leave a link for that. The MiniFreak is the synthesizer that will add the missing piece, that will add contrast, you know, that will add the ear candy that we're looking for. Now, enough with the chit chat again, let's hear it in another example. So for the second example, I want to go with a trippy lead. See, in my tracks, there's this moment with a fake break. It's fake because there's plain kick and bass, but there's no main leads talking with each other. There's only some trippy atmospheres and lead going on. And this is the part of my track where I would like the dance floor to go into this kind of like a meditative state, if that makes sense. Like they really go into trance, if that makes sense. So we'll create a lead for exactly that moment in the track. So for now, it sounds like this. So for the moment, it has this atmosphere that I've created with the MiniFreak V1. Basically, I'll leave a link for the video right in here. But for now, we'll create this kind of like a triple lead with the MiniFreak V2. So for that, let's go to the wavetable engine, like so. I'll choose a wavetable called Growl2. It sounds like this. Nothing too special. Let's take it an octave lower. Now we have this. Now let's scan it somewhere in here. Nice. Let's go to the advanced section in here, set the sustain all the way up. And now let's play with the width, or basically the PWM. See, it gave it this aggressive character. Now, with a random arpeggiated lead, if we modulate the width with the velocity, we'll get this result. So let's add the random arpeggiated lead. Let's go to the macro matrix in here. Let's set the velocity plus aftertouch to only velocity, and let's modulate the oscillator 1 timbre, basically, all the way up. And now we have this. Pretty interesting. Now let's add a bandpass filter like this. Alright, that's really nice, but this lead isn't trippy enough. To make it trippy enough, I'm going to complement the wavetable engine here with a model engine from the second oscillator. Let's set it to model like this. Let's turn down the first oscillator for now. And let's set the enharmonics all the way up. Let's set the timbre somewhere in here and a little decay. And now I have this. Of course, we hear nothing because the volume is set to 0. Let's set it all the way up. Now we have this. Let's modulate the pitch with a random LFO. So LFO number 1, let's set it to sample and hold like this. I'll set the retriggering to poly keyboard, and I'll set the rate in here to straight like this, and I'll set it to 1/16 basically. Now let's modulate the pitch of this oscillator. Now, I want to modulate the cutoff of the filter, but I don't want to create an automation, and at the same time, I want the modulation to be a little bit humanized. So for that, I'm going to use LFO2, but I'll set it to the shaper wave, and I'm going to create my own shape. So let's go to the LFO shaper in here. Let's make sure we're working with LFO number 2, because it happened with me many times. I'm doing some really nice shapes and I'm doing them for LFO number 1, while LFO number 1 is already routed to other stuff. So let's set the LFO rate in here to all steps. Now, this is something new in this update, because in V1, we only had the rate option to 1 step. Basically, if the rate of the LFO is 2 bars, every step will be 2 bars long. Now, the whole sequence can become 2 bars or 4 bars or whatever we like. This gives us more flexibility and control over the shaper. Now what I'm going to do, I'll create some sort of a weird triangle modulation shape for the filter, just like this. Alright, perfect. So now we have the shape. Let's modulate the filter cutoff with it. Let's click on this little plus sign in here and let's modulate it with LFO number 2. So now we have this. Perfect. Now what I'm going to do, I'll introduce the first oscillator like this, but I'm going to modulate its volume with the LFO shaper, just like this. Now let's add some character to the sound by using an OTT. I'll set the amount to just a tiny bit and give it some time. Now we have this. Now let's give it some width and warmth using the super unison effect. So FX number 2, let's set it to super unison like this, and I'm going to set the algorithm to wavy, or the preset to wavy, detune all the way up. Let's give it some high pass like this and a little bit of dry and wet. Now we have this. That's nice. Now let's give it 180 ping pong delay. For that, I'll go to FX number 3. I'll set it to delay like this. I'll set the preset to filter ping pong sync like this. Set it to 1/8 dotted like this. Insert again, give it some feedback, give it some level. Now I have this. Perfect. Now with the kick and bass and the other atmosphere that we had, we'll get this. Now, a couple of things to mention about this update that are really interesting are, the first one, now the macros can control any modulation on the modulation matrix. So let's say I have the filter cutoff like this. I want to modulate it with the first LFO, so let's just do so. And now if I'll go to the macro assignment in here, I'll click on an empty slot like this. And now if I'll click on the LFO to cutoff like this, I'll set it to 100%. The macro will now control the intensity of the LFO to filter cutoff modulation. And the second thing to mention is that now the three engines from noise engineering has the oscillator free run on and off, meaning we can retrigger their phase. So we can use the SAW-X engine that has a really fat saw to create Psytrance basslines. That in a nutshell was the new firmware update for the MiniFreak synthesizer. And to be completely honest with you, I think it's awesome. I mean, yes, we don't have user wavetable, but what makes this synthesizer stand out for me is two things. First of all, it does what it does really good, and it has its own way of synthesizing a sound, and it's really fun. Second of all, and this is the most important, it doesn't sound the same. I mean, today everyone is using the same synthesizers and tracks are starting to sound the same. A synthesizer like the MiniFreak is capable of adding something new to the table. You know that sound that you'll hear and you'll be like, oh, I've never heard this before? Of course, you don't need the MiniFreak to not sound the same, but it definitely helps with this job. And with this is the end of this tutorial. I really hope you've liked it. I really hope you've learned something new. See you next time.